us, Very Reverend Professor Yuriy Avvakumov. He's the Associate Professor of History of Christianity. He works in the Department of Theology at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, in the United States. He's a historian of Christianity, including a broad specialization in later medieval and early modern periods, has written a lot about the history and theological ideas in Rus, and he combines insightful access to scholasticism, focusing as well on ecclesiology. His paper today is entitled Eastern Catholic Churches and the Henotic Unionist Tradition Towards Understanding the Confessionalization Process in the Christian East. Welcome, Yuriy.
Thank you very much, Father Mark. Ideas that I present here have been outlined in a book chapter forthcoming in print, and I will be able to provide only an incomplete summary of that chapter, just a few highlights. My goal is to briefly discuss two historiographic concepts and topics that, in my view, can promote ecclesiological discussion. So I'm attempting to bridge historiography and ecclesiology. The first one of these concepts is confessionalization, Confessionalisierung. I understand that confessionalization has been addressed already at this conference in at least one of the papers. I had a chance to familiarize myself with Monsignor McPartland's abstract. The second concept is the Unionist, or Henotic, to use the Greek word, tradition, meaning those ecclesiastical figures and intellectuals of the Christian East who advocated for union of Eastern churches with Rome, from the later Byzantine period to the 17th century. I would like to share a few thoughts concerning the role these two concepts and topics could play in our attempts to understand Eastern Catholic Christianity ecclesiologically and to promote Eastern Catholic theological discourse in dialogue with Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic theology. Let me start. It has become almost a commonplace in historiographic discourse to define Eastern Catholic churches as communities with a dual identity, meaning that Eastern Catholics identify themselves as belonging both to the Catholic Church and to Eastern Christianity. The same idea finds a simplified expression in the popular opinion that the Uniate Church is a sort of a fusion or a mix of Western Catholicism with Eastern Orthodoxy. The thesis about the dual identity of the Uniates makes sense exclusively within the picture of world Christianity that is imagined as a world consisting of confessions or denominations. The Catholic and the Orthodox confessions appear in the eyes of contemporary Christians as two impenetrable blocks, Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy, which mutually exclude each other while existing in the public sphere alongside each other. Precisely this picture of the Christian world serves as the foundation of the idea of the dual or hybrid character of Eastern Catholic identity, causing so many predicaments for the average Eastern Catholic. When and how did this contemporary confessional denominational world arise? For neither the early church nor the medieval period knew an established system of confessional divisions within Christianity. Today, historians agree that the system of confessions emerged as a result of the 16th century Protestant Reformation and the ensuing religious divisions within the European Christian world. It is in Germany, the cradle of the Lutheran Reformation, that the question about the origins of the modern confessions has been particularly intensely debated, at least since the late 1950s, in connection with the study of the Reformation period. Ernst Walter Zeden, a German historian who converted from Protestantism to the Roman Catholic Church in his youth, in a pioneering article published in 1958, introduced the concept of confession building, Konfessionsbildung, as a prospective topic for historical research. Two German scholars of the next generation, Wolfgang Reinhardt and Heinz Schilling, the former coming from the Catholic, the latter from the Protestant context, have moved focus from church to society and introduced the concept of confessionalization, Confessionalisierung, denoting by this word a complex process of growing divergence between religious communities that was promoted by methods of what they called social disciplining, which involved church, state, society, and culture. Confessionalization is regarded by Reinhardt and Schilling as one of the driving forces of modernization. The confessional age and confessionalization concepts have proven to be productive tools beyond just the study of the Reformation era Germany. A number of historians have extended the geography of confessionalization into other countries and even continents, up to China and India. The chronology of confessionalization has been also extended into the later period. In the early 2000s, the concepts of the second confessional age and second confessionalization were suggested by Olaf Blaschke for the religious developments that took place in the long 19th century. This leads me to the question, can the paradigm be applied to Eastern Christianity? Does it have heuristic value with respect to Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic ecclesial communities? There has been already some discussion of this in research with different opinions in favor and against, but I think that the actual potential of this concept for the study of Eastern Christianity remains insufficiently recognized. My purpose here is to invite church historians and historical theologians, particularly those who grapple with the identity questions of Byzantine Rite Catholic Christianity in its relation to the Orthodox churches, to take a closer look at the confessionalization thesis and to reconsider it not only as an interesting sociological paradigm, but as a concept with ecclesiological implications. Continuity and change. These concepts determine the work of a historian as well as the way an average person positions her or himself on the historical axis. Both ecclesiological theory and taken for granted common ecclesial knowledge tend to underscore continuity with respect to one's own ecclesial community. This is particularly true for the Roman Catholic and for Eastern Orthodox churches. Roman Catholics and the Orthodox are convinced that their churches existed, in the eyes of many of them, without interruption, at least since the time of the apostles. To be sure, both the Orthodox and the Catholic communities and their theologians can produce some excellent arguments in support of the continuity of the Christian faith in its various forms since the apostolic times until this day. But can they prove 2,000 years of existence of that ritual, devotional, legal, bureaucratic, educational, doctrinal, cultural system which constitutes the backbone of their respective communities in their contemporary modern form? Can they prove that their sense of belonging, their image of oneself and the other, their definition of members and non-members, their treatment of allies and adversaries, their commonly accepted picture of the global ecclesial world have continued since Pentecost, or since Emperor Constantine, or even since 1054, if we take for granted this widely misunderstood textbook date, until our day? Such essentially was the question which the German authors of the confessionalization thesis raised in the course of their study of 16th and 17th century Christianity. Their answer to this question was no. And precisely here lies the gist and the heuristic value of the confessionalization paradigm. Special credit should go to Ernst Walter Zehden and Wolfgang Reinhardt, both of them Roman Catholic scholars, for their courage in pronouncing this no, not only in respect to Protestant Christianity, but in relation to the Roman Catholic Church too. The same logic can and should be applied to relations between Western Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy. The idea of orthodoxy as it is imagined today by Greeks, Serbians, Romanians, Bulgarians, Ukrainians, Russians, etc., and as it is described in numerous Orthodox catechetical accounts and popular introductions to Eastern Orthodoxy, presents itself as an inevitable totality, counting 2 millennia of history. Upon closer inspection, however, it turns out to be an astonishingly late product, the result of a confessionalization process. Like with the Western confessionalization, we can distinguish between the first and the second confessional age, the first one dating back to the 17th and early 18th century, the second one occupying the long 19th century, that is the period between 1792 and 1914. That said, there is a certain asymmetry between Western Christianity and the Christian East in this regard. The process of confessionalization in the East, catalyzed by interaction with Western confessions, began later and lasted longer than it did in the West, so that we should actually speak of confessionalization lag in Eastern Christianity. Among the milestones of the first confessional age are the publication of the Orthodox Confessiones by Patriarch Cyril Lucaris, 1629, and Dositheos of Jerusalem, 1672, relatively late documents if seen from Western perspective, and they by no means made the confessionalization process complete. But even before these documents of confessional consolidation and propaganda appeared in the Greek area, confessionalization made its way into the Byzantine Rite communities in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It is precisely here that the Uniates, future Eastern Catholics, enter the stage. The movement towards union with the Roman Church counted at least 3 centuries of history prior to the inception of the confessional age. The theological tradition, which can be called Henotic or Unionist, experienced a revival in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the late 16th century. Regrettably, I cannot devote more time to speak about the Henotic tradition. If I may, to refer to my article published in the volumes of the Stuttgart Orthodox Eastern Catholic Conference of 2019 on that. For our topic, it is crucial that by 1596, there existed a notable asymmetry between the post-Tridentine Roman Catholic Church that was headed full speed towards confessionalization on the one hand, and the Kievan Byzantine Rite community still untouched by confessionalization on the other. The Ukrainian bishops did not understand their step towards union as a change of confession. It was not their goal to become Catholics instead of being Orthodox, for an obvious and simple reason. Eastern Christianity knew no Eastern Orthodox confession at that point. It was this confessional asymmetry between Rome and the Ukrainians which doomed the original intention of the Union's protagonists to failure. A pre-confessional, open-ended and undisciplined sense of the Church on the Kievan side was confronted by the up-to-date, modern methods of confessional disciplining on part of the papal curia. Rome's handling of the Greek religion in many aspects resembled its approach to the new Protestant confessions. No mixture or confusion was permitted, and every Catholic Christian had to be educated and disciplined in the Catholic faith with the assistance of the respective Catholic state power. This encounter of pre-confessional Eastern Christianity with the newly reformed post-Tridentine Catholicism inevitably had to trigger confessionalization processes in the Christian East, which became particularly evident in 1620, when Patriarch Theophanes of Jerusalem consecrated a parallel, non-united hierarchy that split the Ruthenians into 2 rival Byzantine Rite communities, the Uniate and the non-Uniate, Uniti and Disuniti. I'm slowly approaching my conclusion. Let me continue with a quotation. Quote, "After 5 centuries, the age of confessionalization has ended once and for all." Quote end. Concurring with these words of Paolo Prodi to some degree, in the sense that confessionalism has indeed dramatically receded since at least 1960s in the relations between traditional Protestant confessions and the Roman Catholic Church, I do not think I can agree with the categorically global tenor of Paolo Prodi's statement. I'm not so certain about this once and for all, even in regard to Western denominations. And it is definitely not the case in the area of Eastern Orthodoxy. Quite the opposite is manifest before our eyes in the drastic increase of confessionalism in some Orthodox churches. I'm thinking in particular of the Russian Orthodox Church. Cannot go further into more detail on this, regrettably. In the academic world, Orthodox neo-confessionalism has found strong support in neo-patristic theology, the predominant Orthodox intellectual movement of the second half of the 20th century, which remains highly influential up to this day. It was neo-patristic theology which constructed, if you like, Eastern Orthodoxy as the contemporary Christian world knows it. Practically all the main ideas that an interested Christian in the West can acquire today about Eastern Orthodoxy come from the pen of neo-patristic theologians and from authors who are heavily influenced by them or popularize their ideas. Let us make no mistake, and I hope my point will be correctly understood. Neo-patristic theologians, from George Florovsky to John Myndorf, made a truly outstanding contributions to the study of Greek patristics and the later Byzantine legacy, and their works still deserve to be read and admired. However, the neo-patristic school also tendentiously presented Eastern Orthodoxy as radically different from Western Christianity, and in many cases as being incompatible with it. Particularly with George Florovsky, we see it clearly. As functioning within the Byzantine tradition itself, neo-patristic authors introduced a normativity which was, despite its historiographic framework, ultimately ahistorical. By rejecting those parts of the Byzantine religious heritage that they considered inauthentic and heterodox, neo-patristic theologians tended to overlook the rich diversity of Eastern Christian thought. What is problematic here is not the distinction between orthodoxy and heterodoxy itself, a distinction that is natural for theology, but the obsessive hunt after Western influences in Byzantine and post-Byzantine religious culture, influences that are labeled pseudomorphic, to use Florovsky's expression, by the sheer fact of being Western, Westernizing, Latinizing, and so on. Thus, not religious truth, but cultural provenience becomes the ultimate criterion. Byzantinism, understood as adherence to some ideal Byzantine patristics and identified primarily with the theology of Gregory Palamas, has become one of the central determining aspects of neo-patristic normativity. Granted, no serious scholar today would deny that Gregory Palamas belongs in the number of the greatest later Byzantine theologians. But the neo-patristic fixation on Palamas and Palamism has also a problematic side. All non-Palamist elements in the Byzantine theological legacy have been excluded by the neo-patristic authors from the privilege of being recognized as truly Byzantine. For our topic, it is of particular importance that this pro-Palamist confessional discipline affected our contemporary theological understanding, or rather misunderstanding, of the Henotic, Unionist movement in Byzantine and post-Byzantine theology. That movement which resisted anti-Latinism and aspired reconciliation and union with the Roman Church. Think of John Bekos, Demetrios Kydonis, Cardinal Bessarion, etc. This movement was ignored or declared anti-Byzantine, not authentically Byzantine by the neo-patristic school. I conclude with 3 points. First, the discussion of the confessionalization process inevitably leads to the conclusion that confessional terms, not only Catholicism, but Orthodoxy too, are inapplicable for the pre-confessional age. That is, for the period prior to the 16th century in the West, and I would say the 19th century in the East. I can't go further into that, into argumentation in favor of that, regrettably. Second conclusion concerns Eastern Catholic identity. My thesis here is intentionally provocative. I think that contrary to the generally accepted narrative, the united Christians of the Greek Rite in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, or Uniates, possess historical priority over the confessional Orthodox. The Uniates did not split from the Orthodox Church to become Catholics, as the popular opinion goes. The united emerged first. The disunited, or pious or Orthodox, the terms that were used at that time interchangeably, pious actually was more popular than Orthodox, appeared in response. As an officially recognized body, the pious or Orthodox Christians came into being no earlier than the establishment of the competing non-uniate hierarchy in 1620. This insight helps us understand the intricacies and vicissitudes of the uniate predicament. The uniates made their leap into confessionality directly from a pre-confessional, undisciplined ecclesial existence, and these origins can explain the traces of pre-confessionality which Eastern Catholic churches retain until our day, and which make their existence in a confessionalized world so slippery at times. My third and final concluding thought is about the significance of the confessionalization concept for ecclesiological theory and ecclesiastical practice. Confessionalization should by no means be seen as in an exclusively negative light, of course. Its role in the modernization processes in church and society in the Christian East deserves a well-balanced historical exploration devoid of hasty value judgments. It is clear, however, that any revival of confessionalism as an ecclesiastical political program for our day would be disastrous. In many cases, confessional paradigms penetrate to the very core of modern theological thinking, often almost unrecognizably for theologians themselves, who seem to breathe the air of confessionalism without noticing it. Both identifying the confessionalist component in contemporary ecclesiastical theory and practice and deconstructing it becomes an indispensable task for theologians today. Eastern Catholics, with their unique historical experience, can contribute much on the road towards a Christian world beyond confessionalism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yuriy, for that powerful presentation and very comprehensive and very thought-provoking in the way you've been able to pool various concepts together as we're looking at this. I'll take my prerogative and ask you the first question on your second summary point. You were talking about 1620 as being this moment of confessionalization of those that were in opposition to those who were in union. Can you just elaborate on that? How did that function, and what were the things that you can point to establish that movement within that group?
Well, thank you for this question. I think the very fact of the division of the emergence of two parallel hierarchies, the one that existed previously and which in its main part got itself united with Rome since 1595-96 on the one hand, and that hierarchy, those bishops who were consecrated by Patriarch Theophanes, who visited the area at that time. The very fact of this, of the emergence of two hierarchies rivaling for the same dioceses, the same sees, was a powerful fact that led to something that we can call confessionalization. And of course, that led also to further ideologizing and theologizing as a legitimation for each of these two hierarchies, directed against each other. So the process is in fact similar to what happened in the West previously, with the emergence of the Reformation churches. And therefore, I see that this year is, in a sense, was a milestone. Although I still think that it was the process was not yet complete, and my actual thesis that regrettably I was not able to present sufficiently here is that we should speak of Eastern Christianity in its truly confessionalized age only starting from mid-19th century. And there are good arguments in favor of that. But 1620 is, of course, a milestone, an important milestone.
Sure. I'm totally fascinated by this, but I don't want to steal the microphone, so anybody in the audience that would like to ask a question?
Thank you, Father Yuriy, for your fascinating presentation. Inspired by the work of Hermann Sieben, all of his work on the ecumenical councils and debates over the lists of the councils and so on, I started a little, adventure of my own and tried to find Ruthenian evidence of debates over the councils, and I found lots of ambiguity, maybe, as I might expect. And so you have, for instance, Hypatie signing off on the Tridentine Declaration while he's in Rome, and then he writes to somebody right afterward talking about the 7 ecumenical councils. And then you have liturgical materials after Zamość talking about both Florence and Trent as the ecumenical councils, and so on. Is this and maybe other ambiguities, are these concrete ways in which the Eastern Catholic churches, and of course here the Chaldeans have a completely different and also interesting story, are these ambiguities maybe gifts that the Eastern Catholics can bring to overly confessionalized Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox settings?
Yeah, I perhaps can only say I fully agree with the points that you made. Regrettably, I was not able to see from whom these comments came. I don't see it on my screen. I'm sorry, but I can only concur. Yeah, and I think that exactly this position, which is, which is of course a difficult, not an easy position between the fronts, so to say, or caught in the crossfire, which can play a positive role, a challenging, but still a positive role in this. Yeah, so if this answers your question, at least, yeah, as a brief reaction to that.
Thank you very much. And if you can introduce yourself as you ask your question.
Igor Shaban, Ukraine, Greek Catholic Church. Thank you for your speech, Professor. About confessionalism, as I understood well, the Catholic Church taking consideration about universal church, and the Orthodoxy making accent more on a local church, on a local nation in a positive way. And we have Eastern Catholic Church let's say Greek Catholics or Romanian Greek Catholics or Ukrainian or others. And as a Catholic Church, we are more close to universal thoughts about church, but from the Eastern point of view, we also want to belong to our nation and want to be close to our nation, and we sometimes we want belongs to only one nation. What do you think, in your opinion, you studied this, in the very close future, in which way, in which direction this thought will be moving?
I'm very sorry. I'm not sure I got the point of the question. There was some disturbance. I was not able quite well to hear it. I'm very, very sorry.
He will ask it again.
Українською. The Catholic point of view of the Church as universal one. So all the nations belongs to the Catholic Church. And from the other hand, in Orthodoxy, mostly they belong to some national, local churches. You hear me?
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
And the Eastern Catholics, they belong to Catholics' universal paradigm, but also they have a national, local understanding of the church. What do you think in the close future, how it will be growing up? I mean, in which direction it will be moved? More to universal understanding of the church, or more to a local one? And what is better?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Now I got it. This is a great question, and of course, a question that is worth a few volumes at least to be able to discuss and answer this, to discuss the problem. I think the basic principle, as I see it at least, is that the very tension between these two principles can be fruitful. Yeah. And let it continue. Let the tension continue. It would be problematic if one of these two aspects, one of these two sides would take overhand, so to say, in that. The tension should continue. But I also think that Eastern Catholic churches could contribute to a reform of the Roman Catholic Church considerably in the context of contemporary discussions of further ways, further development of the Roman Catholic Church, by insisting on their own vision of church unity. There are so many questions, canonical, legal questions, that remain actually unresolved still within the framework of the Roman Catholic canonical system. And I think we should have the courage to raise these these questions. And this had certainly had some connection to national perspectives. That we bring our own contributions to the world Catholic Church from national perspectives also. Yeah. Just a few thoughts on that.
Thank you. And we have another question now.
Father Yuriy, it's Paul MacPartlin, and thank you very much indeed. I was completely fascinated by your presentation. I mentioned confessionalization myself in my paper this morning, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and Florovsky's position, of course, in vis-a-vis confessionalization is quite fascinating. There's two. And I would love I would love to discuss this at length with you, but there's two maybe particular points I would just like to ask your opinion on, if I may. One is this idea of pseudomorphism, because when Florovsky talks about the pseudomorphism of Orthodox theology in the 17th and 18th centuries, my understanding, and I'm very interested to hear your thought on this, is my first point, is that he is not necessarily talking purely about a Western influence per se, but actually about the scholastic influence. Because I think I'm right in saying that he also says that there was also at that time, or rather in the second millennium, because scholasticism got into the East later than it got into the West, that scholasticism almost brought a pseudomorphism into the West as well, kind of producing a sort of distortion of a patristic understanding, so that in a sense, both East and West suffered a scholastic pseudomorphism. And I would be very interested in your thoughts on that. But if I may just quickly pop a second question, it relates to the idea of Hellenization. And I know this is a huge and controversial question, but I find a certain ambivalence in Florovsky, because Zizioulas says that he would fully, and of course he's a disciple of Florovsky, he would say that he would agree with Florovsky that the authentic Catholicity of the Church must embrace both the East and the West. But then, so, you have that kind of two lungs idea almost, in a patristic sense. But then there are times also when Florovsky seems to be almost excluding the West and going for a purely Eastern patristic tradition. And this can be quite puzzling. And I wonder if there is perhaps an answer via the idea of Hellenization, because Florovsky is very much in favor of the Hellenization, regards it as providential, that the Christian gospel went into the Hellenistic world at a very early stage, and thinks that that was decisive for the formation of early Christianity. And I wonder if it all depends on how you interpret Hellenization. In other words, that on the face of it could seem like he is discounting Western Christianity and even the Western patristic tradition, because Hellenization must be Greek, must be East, mustn't it? But on the other hand, I'm recalling also that, unless I'm mistaken, Joseph Ratzinger is very convinced that it was indeed providential, not only for the East, but also for the West, for Christianity as a whole, that there was a process of Hellenization in the very early generations of the church, and almost sees that Hellenization of the early centuries of the church as being as providential as the fact that the Old Testament revelation took place within a Hebrew milieu. And, just as we don't kind of object or find problematic the fact that the Old Testament was thoroughly in a Hebrew milieu, so we shouldn't find problematic the idea that the early Christian centuries were flourished, and Christian thought developed within a Hellenistic milieu, because that is something that not just the East, but also the West has benefited from. And so my second question, therefore, is just, what would you say about Hellenization? And I know that's a monster question, but I wonder if you would just like to share a thought or two. Thank you so much.
Thank you, truly. Thank you very, very much for these profound, really profound, deep questions. Of course, what I can do just to provide, yeah, a kind of very, very brief first thoughts on that, at least some reaction to that, some attempt at a reply. First, concerning the first point about scholasticism, I certainly agree with you in your interpretation of Florovsky's attitude towards scholasticism as maybe even the main problem, yeah, or at least one of the main problems, and seemingly, yeah, of course, the thesis could go, yeah, Florovsky's point could mean that scholasticism spoiled, so to say, also the West, yeah, equally like it corrupted or spoiled the East. However, I just think that the fact that Augustine becomes, suspected again and again in the writings of generally, I would say generally in the neo-patristic school, it is suspect of, if not of heresy, but at least of some, tendencies, problematic tendencies, half heretical or whatever. This shows that scholasticism is not the only factor, is seen as not the only factor here. So this is just my thought concerning this, and in any way, even if we focus on scholasticism or even exclusively on scholasticism, it's still the fact it is still seen as a fact that scholasticism comes from the West for Florovsky, which, by the way, in my view, and I think that many scholars today would agree with it, actually is not the phenomenon exclusively of the West, and that the Byzantine tradition sort of has its own form of what might be called scholasticism, or some scholastic forms of reasoning. Of course, the Paradebeispiel, as Germans say, would be Maximus the Confessor here, because some Orthodox theologians even call it a sort of early scholasticism. Although I think the term would not be quite appropriate if we think of early scholasticism in terms of the Western tradition. So yeah, this is just a few thoughts on that. And concerning the second question, second point, let me also bring into conversation, along with Hellenization, which is of course a huge topic. I don't think I would be able to produce anything reasonable on that at the moment. But there is another term, Byzantinization, yeah, or Byzantinism, which is used by Florovsky, if we speak about Florovsky in particular. And I think it is important that he begins his book on Russian theology, the ways of Russian theology, with the chapter "The Crisis of Russian Byzantinism." So for him, it becomes clear that for him, Byzantinism is a model, the ideal, and this is, of course, has a clear connection and embeddedness in a cultural and specific cultural and even national or even ethnic tradition, if you like. So those are just a few thoughts on that. Thank you very much for your questions.
Thank you so much, Yuriy, and thank you to our panelists. As we've come to the end of the day, although I think that there's much eagerness for more conversation, and that's always the difficulty with these types of gatherings, to really have time to discuss where I find so fruitful. We're beginning tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp.